He mops floors at night, head down, never speaking, just the janitor, until today. The man moved with a quiet rhythm, a ghost in grey coveralls pushing a bucket of murky water through the empty, echoing halls of power. He was a fixture, a piece of the building itself, as unremarkable as the polished marble beneath his feet. To the executives who strode past him, their expensive shoes clicking with self-importance, he was invisible. But that was about to change. In one ugly, thoughtless moment, a pair of arrogant executives decided to have some fun. They tripped him in the hallway, their laughter sharp and cruel as he went down hard, the dirty water splashing across the pristine floor. They saw a janitor, a nobody, a target for their casual cruelty, but they had no idea who they had just provoked. The janitor was not a janitor at all. He was an undercover FBI agent, a man running a deep and dangerous sting operation into the heart of their corrupt world. And by the time he was done with them, their glittering careers, their stolen fortunes, and their precious freedom would be nothing more than dust. Before we find out what happens next, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. And if this story already has you hooked, hit that like button so more people can see it. The hallways of Stratton Defense Systems were paved with ambition and polished to a blinding sheen. Cold, white marble reflected the recessed lighting, creating a sterile canyon of wealth and power. It was a place where futures were made and broken in whispers, where billion-dollar deals were signed with diamond-studded pens. Through these corridors of influence, Darius Cole moved with the practiced invisibility of a man who understood his role. He was just the janitor. His movements were slow, deliberate, each swipe of the mop a study in quiet efficiency. He kept his head down, his gaze fixed on the floor he was paid to clean, a posture that broadcast humility and deference. He was part of the background, a silent cog in a massive machine he was meant to serve, not understand. Late one evening, as the building began to empty, two figures emerged from a corner office, their voices bouncing off the hard surfaces. Tyler Cray and Brett Langley walked with the easy confidence of men who had never been told no. Tyler, with his perfectly coiffed hair and a suit that cost more than a month of Darius's supposed salary, was laughing. It was a sharp, barking sound, devoid of genuine humor. Brett, his loyal shadow, trotted a half-step behind, his laughter a weaker echo of his superiors. They were celebrating a small, cruel victory. The look on her face when I told her to pack her desk, Tyler gloated, straightening his tie, priceless. She actually thought her work ethic mattered, Brett snickered, a sycophantic sound. You're a legend, Tyler. She was getting too comfortable anyway, probably thought she had a future here. Their conversation was a casual display of the rot that festered just beneath the company's gleaming surface. It was the sound of entitlement, the belief that other people were merely tools to be used and discarded. Darius heard them coming. He did what he always did. He angled his heavy mop bucket toward the wall, making himself smaller, clearing a path for the important men to pass. It was a gesture of respect he performed a dozen times a night. He expected them to walk by without a glance, just as they always did. But tonight was different. As they drew near, a malicious glint appeared in Brett's eyes. He shared a silent, conspiratorial look with Tyler. It was a look that said, "Let's have some fun." As Darius moved aside, Brett's leg shot out, his polished leather shoe positioned perfectly in Darius's path. It was a movement that looked almost accidental to the casual observer, a clumsy misstep, but it was deliberate, calculated. Darius's worn work boot caught the unexpected obstacle. For a moment he fought for balance, his body lurching forward, but the momentum of the heavy bucket was too much. He stumbled, his arms flailing, and then he went down. The plastic bucket tipped over with a loud clatter, sending a wave of grey, soapy water sloshing across the immaculate marble floor. The sound echoed in the sudden silence of the hallway. Then the silence was shattered by laughter. Tyler roared, clutching his stomach as if he'd just heard the funniest joke in the world. Brett joined in, pointing a manicured finger at the fallen man. "Whoa! There! Watch your step, Chief," Brett sneered, his voice dripping with false concern. The few remaining employees who lingered in the lobby turned to see the source of the commotion. They saw Darius on his hands and knees, surrounded by a puddle of dirty water. They saw two of the company's rising stars laughing at him, and one by one, Nervous chuckles rippled through the small crowd. No one wanted to be on the wrong side of Tyler and Brett. Tyler strolled over, looking down at Darius with an expression of utter contempt. Look at this mess. Can't even push a bucket straight. Bet he can't even spell the word mop. The insult hung in the air, sharp and ugly. Darius felt the stares of the onlookers, a mix of pity and amusement. He pushed himself up slowly, his face a mask of neutrality. There was no anger in his eyes, no flicker of shame. He simply rose his feet, his movements calm and methodical. He brushed off his coveralls, the fabric damp and stained. Then, he looked directly at Brett and Tyler, his voice low and steady. I apologize. It won't happen again. The apology was so devoid of emotion, it seemed to momentarily confuse them. Brett, recovering his swagger, jabbed a thumb toward the spill. Yeah. Well, see that it doesn't. Now clean it up, and do it faster this time. Some of us have places to be. The two men shared another laugh, then turned and walked away, their shoulders shaking with mirth. They disappeared into the waiting elevator, leaving Darius alone with his bucket and the spreading puddle. From across the lobby, near the elevator bank, a junior accountant named Ellie Monroe watched the entire exchange. Her face was tight with disgust. She had seen the deliberate trip, had heard the cruel words. The casual inhumanity of it made her stomach clench. As the elevator doors slid shut, she saw Darius turn back to his work. But then he did something strange. He paused, his head tilting ever so slightly. His eyes, which had seemed so empty moments before, were now anything but. They were scanning the ceiling, moving from one black dome of a security camera to the next. It was a quick, almost imperceptible survey, but it was unmistakable. He wasn't just a janitor. He was something else entirely. And in his eyes, she saw a flicker of something she couldn't name. It wasn't anger. It was focus. A calm, deadly focus. The laughter of the executives faded down the hallway, but the humiliation lingered in the air like a bad smell. Darius was still on his knees, the cold marble seeping through his work pants. He methodically began to gather his cleaning supplies, his movements unhurried. Around the lobby, the small audience that had gathered began to disperse, but the whispers continued. They were the low, dismissive murmurs of people who saw what happened and chose to find it amusing. Tyler, emboldened by the attention, wasn't finished. He turned back before stepping into the elevator, his voice loud enough for everyone to hear. You know, it's people like that who are a drain on the system, he announced, gesturing vaguely in Darius's direction. They're like invisible parasites. They just exist in the background, contributing nothing. Brett nodded vigorously, adding his own cruel commentary. Totally. They're lucky to have a job at all. The words were meant to sting, to cement Darius's status as something less than human in the eyes of their peers. Ellie Monroe felt a surge of anger. She took a step forward, her mouth opening to say something, to call them out for their behavior. But before she could speak, Brett caught her eye and gave a dismissive little wave. It's just a joke, Ellie, he said, his tone patronizing. Lighten up. Don't be so sensitive. The implicit threat was clear. Don't cause trouble. Don't challenge the hierarchy. Ellie froze, the words dying in her throat. She was new here, a junior employee with no power. Speaking up would be career suicide. She knew it, but the shame of her silence burned in her chest. Tyler, enjoying his moment, swaggered back toward Darius. He clapped a hand on Darius's shoulder, a gesture that was both familiar and deeply condescending, like a king patting the head of a court jester. No hard feelings, boss man, he said, his voice slick with false camaraderie. Maybe next time, just get out of the way when your betters are coming through. He gave Darius's shoulder a final proprietary slap, before turning away for good. Across the lobby, a young marketing assistant, eager to curry favor with the executives, had his phone out. He was recording the scene, a smirk on his face. The video would be shared in company chat groups within minutes, a little piece of entertainment at the expense of a man no one cared about. Darius didn't flinch at the touch. He didn't react to the words. He simply looked up, his face an unreadable mask. He met the eyes of the person recording, his gaze lingering for just a second. There was no emotion in that look, no plea for mercy, no spark of anger. It was as if he were a camera himself, simply recording the data. One of the other executives, a man in a tailored gray suit, chimed in, eager to join the fun. Honestly, what do you expect? Bet this guy couldn't even get hired at McDonald's. A fresh round of chuckles went through the remaining group. The cruelty was casual, effortless. It was the culture of the place. A top-down rot where strength was measured by one's ability to crush those perceived as weaker. Ellie watched, her heart pounding with a mixture of rage and helplessness. She saw Darius finally turn away from them all. He picked up his mop, wrung it out in the bucket, and began to clean up the spill. His movements were the same as before, slow, methodical, efficient. He worked with a quiet dignity that stood in stark contrast to the ugliness he had just endured. He was erasing the mess, erasing the moment, erasing himself. But Ellie noticed it again. As he mopped, his head was down, but his eyes were not. They were subtly scanning the lobby, taking in every detail. He noted the position of the security cameras, the angles they covered. He registered the faces of the people who had laughed, the ones who had recorded, the ones who had simply watched and done nothing. It was not the behavior of a man who was beaten down. It was the behavior of a man who was gathering intelligence. Her eyes narrowed. A strange feeling washed over her, a mix of fear and intrigue. The janitor was more than just a janitor. He was collecting information. He was taking note. And Ellie had the distinct feeling that everyone who had just laughed at him was going to regret it. 2 weeks earlier, the world was a different color. The sterile white marble of Stratton Defense was replaced by the muted gray and deep blue of a high-tech briefing room in Washington, D.C. This was the heart of the FBI's Special Operations Division, a place where the nation's most complex and dangerous threats were dissected and neutralized. Standing before a large digital screen was Director Evelyn Grant, a woman whose calm demeanor concealed a mind as sharp as a surgeon's scalpel. Across the table sat Darius Cole. Here, he was not a janitor. He was Special Agent Cole, one of the Bureau's most effective and respected undercover operatives. There were no coveralls, no mop bucket. He wore a simple, well-fitting suit, his posture straight, his eyes alert and intelligent. Director Grant pointed to the screen, which displayed the gleaming logo of Stratton Defense Systems. Stratton is a ghost, she began, her voice low and serious. On paper, they are one of the Pentagon's most reliable defense contractors. They deliver on time, under budget. They are patriots. She paused, letting the irony hang in the air. In reality, they are leeches, bleeding the American taxpayer dry. The screen changed, showing a complex web of shell corporations, offshore accounts, and redacted payment ledger. We believe they've embezzled upwards of $200 million over the last 5 years. They do it through a network of phantom vendors, companies that exist only as a mailing address and a bank account. Stratton pays them for services never rendered, and the money vanishes. Darius listened, his face impassive. He absorbed the information, his mind already working, piecing together the puzzle. Bribes? He asked, his voice a quiet baritone. Nothing like the mumbled deference of his janitor persona. Grant nodded. At the highest levels, we suspect they have someone inside the Pentagon's procurement office on their payroll, someone who signs off on the invoices and looks the other way. We need a name. We need hard evidence that will stick. This was the crux of the problem. Stratton was insulated, protected by layers of legal and financial misdirection. Getting inside their inner circle was impossible through conventional means. They needed someone on the inside, someone who could move through the company unnoticed, who could see and hear things without raising suspicion. They needed a ghost. Your assignment, should you choose to accept it, Grant continued, her eyes locking with his, is to become part of the scenery. We've created a complete identity for you. David Johnson. No family, spotty work history. Perfect for a low-level, high-turnover position. She clicked a button, and a photo of Darius in janitor coveralls appeared on the screen. You'll be invisible, she said. Perfect. Darius didn't hesitate. I'll take it. For him, this was more than just an assignment. It was a calling. He excelled at becoming other people, at shedding his own identity and slipping into the skin of another. The file was slid across the table. It contained everything he needed to become David the janitor. A fabricated social security number, a flimsy resume, a backstory of quiet desperation. The next few days were a blur of transformation. He spent hours with a behavioral coach, learning to change his posture. His proud, confident stance melted away, replaced by a weary slump. He worked with a voice coach to soften his speech, to introduce a slight mumble, to strip the intelligence and authority from his tone. He studied the mundane world of industrial cleaning products, learning the difference between a floor buffer and a wax stripper. He was meticulous, he was a professional. He was becoming invisible. Back in the present, the hallway at Stratum was quiet again. The executives were gone. The onlookers had returned to their desks. Darius finished mopping the floor, the marble now clean and dry, as if the incident had never happened. He pushed his bucket toward the service corridor, his movements once again slow and weary. He entered the janitor's closet, a small, windowless room that smelled of bleach and old rags. He closed the door, plunging the room into near darkness. But this closet held a secret. He reached behind a shelf stacked with cleaning supplies and pressed a loose section of the wall. A panel clicked open silently, revealing a hidden compartment. Inside was not a bottle of glass cleaner or a box of trash bags. It was a small, high-tech kit, a secure laptop, a listening device, and a small digital camera. He carefully removed his work gloves and sat down on an overturned bucket. His posture changed instantly. The slump was gone, replaced by the ramrod straightness of a federal agent. He booted up the laptop and began to type. He documented the entire incident in the hallway. He listed the names Tyler Cray, Brett Langley. He noted their words, their actions, the reactions of the crowd. He cross-referenced the time of the incident with the security camera feeds he had mentally mapped out earlier. He wasn't just a victim of their bullying. He was an investigator documenting a symptom of a much larger disease. The arrogance they displayed in the hallway was the same arrogance that allowed them to believe they could steal millions from the government without consequence. They saw him as trash, someone to be tripped and mocked. They had no idea that he was the one taking out the garbage. He was not just watching. He was building a case. And every insult, every laugh, every moment of casual cruelty was just another brick in the wall he was building around them. The humiliation in the hallway was a familiar sting. It was a ghost from a past Darius Cole had never truly left behind. To understand why he chose this life, why he willingly submerged himself in roles where he was overlooked and underestimated, one had to go back years to a different life, a different man. Before he was a ghost, Darius was a star, a brilliant profiler at the FBI Academy. He had a unique talent for seeing the patterns in human behavior, for understanding the dark motivations that drove people to do terrible things. He was on a fast track to a decorated career behind a desk, analyzing data and shaping investigations from a safe distance. But that was never his path. The real reason he joined the Bureau, the reason he gravitated toward the dangerous world of undercover work, was his father. James Cole was a good man, a proud man. He had worked his entire life as a maintenance supervisor for a large, private corporation. He wasn't just a janitor, he was the man who kept the entire facility running. He knew every pipe, every wire, every secret corner of the building. He took pride in his work, in making things right. But his employers, a family of old money industrialists, saw him as nothing more than a part of the building itself. One day, a valuable piece of equipment went missing from the executive suite. Without evidence, without so much as a proper investigation, they accused James. They called him into a grand, wood-paneled office, a room designed to intimidate. They looked at his work-worn hands, his simple uniform, and they saw a thief. They fired him on the spot, refusing to pay his severance or his pension. The young Darius, home from college, had been there the day his father came home, a broke man. He watched as his father tried to explain, his voice thick with a shame he didn't deserve. "They called me just a janitor," James had whispered, the words like poison on his tongue. "They laughed at me." That moment burned itself into Darius's soul. The image of his father, a man of immense integrity, being humiliated by men of immense wealth and zero character, became the defining moment of his life. It wasn't just about the injustice. It was about the arrogance of power, the blindness of those who stood at the top, unable to see the humanity of those they considered beneath them. A few years later, after his father had passed away, Darius stood with his mother at the funeral. He was already in the FBI, already making a name for himself. "They never see us coming," he told her, his voice low and intense. It was a promise, a vow. He would dedicate his life to holding people like that accountable. He would use their own arrogance against them. He would become the thing they overlooked, the thing they dismissed. He would become the janitor, the driver, the delivery man. He would become invisible, and from the shadows, he would seek justice. Back in the present, in the cramped janitor's closet at Stratton Defense, these memories fueled him. The laughter of Tyler and Brett was an echo of the laughter that had broken his father. But this time, the story would have a different ending. For weeks, he had been meticulously piecing together the puzzle of Stratton's corruption. Posing as the quiet janitor, he had access to everything. He emptied the trash cans in the executive offices, recovering shredded documents that he would painstakingly reassemble late at night. He saw the suspicious lunch meetings between Stratton executives and men who were clearly government officials. He watched from a distance as USB drives were discreetly passed in the hallway, disguised as a casual handshake. He planted listening devices, disguised as air fresheners, in conference rooms where the most sensitive conversations took place. He was building a mountain of evidence, one piece of filth at a time. The incident in the hallway, the raw, unfiltered display of their character, was just the final piece of the motivational puzzle. It made the mission personal. It was no longer just about stolen money. It was about a sickness, a culture of disrespect that started at the top and trickled down. As he finished his report for the night, a grim smile touched his lips. He looked at the array of evidence he had gathered, the web of deceit he had so carefully unraveled. "Time to clean house," he muttered to the empty room, and he knew his father would be proud. Ellie Monroe could not get the image out of her head. The sight of Darius on the floor, the sound of the executive's laughter, the feeling of her own helpless silence. It played on a loop in her mind. The cruelty of it was one thing, but the casualness was what truly haunted her. It was as if stomping on someone's dignity was as normal to them as breathing. That night, she couldn't sleep. She found the video of the incident circulating in a company-wide chat group. The title was "Janitor Fails LOL." She watched it again, her stomach churning. But this time she wasn't just looking at the bullies, she was looking at Darius. She saw his fall, his quiet apology, and then she saw it again. That strange, deliberate glance at the security cameras. It was so quick, so subtle. But it was there. It wasn't the action of a man who was embarrassed or scared. It was the action of a man who was assessing his environment. The thought struck her with a jolt. He's not who he pretends to be. The next day, Ellie was on edge. The office felt different. The air was thick with the unspoken knowledge of what had happened. People who had laughed yesterday avoided her gaze, as if her disapproval was a tangible thing. She saw Brett and Tyler by the coffee machine, basking in their minor celebrity, reenacting the trip for a small, sycophantic audience. The sight of it made her physically ill. She knew she had to do something. She had to know. Driven by an impulse she didn't fully understand, she found an excuse to leave her desk and went looking for him. She checked the usual hallways, the service corridors. Finally, she found him in a quiet, seldom used stairwell, meticulously cleaning the handrails. He was alone. Her heart pounded in her chest. This was a risk, a big one. She took a deep breath and stepped into the stairwell. The door clicked shut behind her, the sound echoing in the concrete enclosure. Darius looked up, his face showing mild surprise, the carefully constructed mask of David the janitor. "Can I help you, miss?" he asked, his voice soft and slightly mumbled. Ellie wrung her hands. I just wanted to say that what they did to you yesterday, it wasn't okay." Her voice was barely a whisper. Darius simply nodded, his expression unchanging. He seemed ready to turn back to his work, to end the conversation. But Ellie couldn't let it go. The question that had been burning in her mind tumbled out before she could stop it. "Why did you look at the cameras?" The effect was instantaneous. Darius froze. It wasn't a dramatic movement, but a complete cessation of all motion. The rag in his hand stopped mid-swipe. His shoulders, usually slumped, became rigid. He slowly turned his head to look at her. And this time, the mask was gone. The vacant, humble look in his eyes was replaced by an intense, piercing gaze. It was the look of a predator who had just realized it was being watched. The silence stretched for a few seconds, thick with unspoken questions. In that moment, Ellie knew her hunch was right. He was not a janitor. He was something else, something far more dangerous and complex. Her fear was quickly replaced by a sense of certainty. This was her chance to do something, to fight back against the rot she had come to despise at Stratton. She reached into her pocket and pulled out her business card. Her hand was trembling slightly, but her voice was firm. "I don't know who you are," she said, holding the card out to him, "but I know you're not just a cleaner. I'm an accountant. I see things that aren't right. I'm tired of the rot here. I want to help." Darius stared at the card, then back at her face. He was evaluating her, profiling her, his mind working at lightning speed. He saw the genuine conviction in her eyes, the mix of fear and resolve. She was either incredibly brave or incredibly foolish, or maybe both. After a long moment, he slowly reached out and took the card. He didn't say a word. He simply gave her a single sharp nod, then turned back to his work. The conversation was over. Ellie, her heart still hammering, turned and quickly walked away. She didn't know if she had just made the biggest mistake of her life, or the best decision. That night, back in the secret compartment of his janitor's closet, Darius looked at the small white business card. Ellie Monroe, junior accountant. He ran her name through the FBI database on his secure laptop. The file that came back was clean. A spotless record, top of her class at university. No red flags. He thought about her words in the stairwell. "I'm tired of the rot here." He had seen the disgust on her face in the lobby. He had seen her start to step forward before being waved off by Brett. She was a risk, an unknown variable in a carefully controlled operation. But she was also a potential asset, a powerful one. An ally on the inside with access to the one thing he needed most, the financial records. He opened his operational file and created a new entry. He typed her name, Ellie Monroe, and next to it, he added a single word, trusted. The sting had just taken an unexpected turn. He had an ally, and the game was about to change. Ellie's offer of help was a key turning a lock Darius hadn't even known was there. He had the what and the who of the corruption. But Ellie had access to the how. She was the one who could navigate the labyrinth of Stratton's financial systems. That night, fueled by a new sense of purpose, Ellie stayed late at the office. The building grew quiet around her, the familiar hum of servers and ventilation the only sound. Her heart pounded as she logged into the company's accounting database. This was it. She was crossing a line. But the memory of Darius on the floor, of Brett and Tyler's smug laughter, pushed her forward. She began to pull vendor records, her fingers flying across the keyboard. She started with the companies that had the vaguest names: Global Logistics Solutions, Apex Material Services, Unified Project Management. The invoices were all perfectly formatted, all approved by the same few senior managers. But as she dug deeper, she found the crack. The addresses for these multi-million-dollar companies were P.O. boxes or rundown mail centers. Their corporate registration numbers were fake. They were ghosts. Invoices for millions of dollars in consulting fees and material acquisition from companies that didn't exist. It was blatant. It was arrogant. It was exactly what Darius was looking for. She downloaded the files onto a secure encrypted flash drive, her hands shaking slightly as the progress bar filled. The next evening, they met in the deserted echo of the employee parking garage. The air was cool and smelled of gasoline and concrete. Darius was a shadow, emerging from behind a concrete pillar as she stepped out of her car. He was back in his janitor persona, his movements quiet and unobtrusive. Ellie handed him the flash drive, her palms sweating. "I found them," she whispered, her voice barely carrying in the cavernous space. "Invoices. Dozens of them, from companies that are complete fiction." Darius took the drive without a word. He pulled out a small, specialized device from his pocket and plugged the drive in. A small screen lit up, and he began to scan the files she had pulled. His eyes moved quickly, absorbing the data. After a moment, he gave a slow, deliberate nod. The corner of his mouth twitched, the closest thing to a smile she had ever seen from him. "This is it," he said, his voice the low, clear tone of Agent Cole, not David the janitor. "This is the key. This connects the money to the company." Ellie felt a surge of relief and adrenaline. She had done the right thing. "There's more," she said, leaning closer. "I overheard something a few weeks ago. Tyler was bragging at a company party. He was drunk. He said he didn't have to worry about audits, because he owned a Pentagon contact." Darius's eyes, which had been focused on the screen, snapped up to meet hers. They narrowed with a predatory intensity. This was the missing link. The phantom vendors were the mechanism. But the Pentagon contact was the enabler. That was the person who ensured the fraudulent invoices were paid without question. That was the heart of the conspiracy. "A name?" Darius asked, his voice sharp. Ellie shook her head, frustrated. No, he was just bragging. He didn't say a name. Darius stared into the middle distance, his mind processing this new piece of information. This operation was bigger than just corporate fraud. It was a matter of national security. The corruption ran all the way to the heart of the nation's defense establishment. "We'll need to go higher," he murmured, more to himself than to her. He looked back at Ellie, his expression serious. "You've done well. Now you need to be careful. Go home. Act normal. Don't speak to me again, unless I initiate contact." He turned and melted back into the shadows of the parking garage, leaving Ellie alone with the thumping of her own heart. She had stepped into a world she couldn't have imagined, a world of spies and secret operations. She was terrified, but she was also exhilarated. She was no longer a helpless bystander. She was part of the solution. As soon as Darius was clear, he made his way to a secure location. He didn't go back to the janitor's closet. This was too important. He went to a small, anonymous apartment he kept as a safe house. Inside, he established a secure satellite link. A moment later, Director Evelyn Grant's face appeared on his screen. "I have the financial evidence," Darius said, his voice crisp and professional. "Phantom vendors, confirmed by an internal source." He quickly uploaded the files Ellie had given him. "And we have a lead on the Pentagon connection. The target is Tyler Cray. He's been bragging about having an inside man." Grant's expression was grim. "This is what we were afraid of. It's not just about money anymore." "I need more resources," Darius said. "I need surveillance on Cray, full-time, and I need a team ready to move." "You'll have it," Grant replied without hesitation. "We need to get that Pentagon contact. Find out how deep this rot goes." Darius nodded. "The net is in the water, Director. Now it's time to get them to swim into it." The call ended. Darius looked at the files on his screen, the intricate web of lies and theft. Thanks to Ellie, he had the leverage he needed. Now, all he had to do was let Tyler Cray's own arrogance do the rest of the work. Tyler Cray felt untouchable. The world was his oyster, and he was happy to crack it open with a hammer. To celebrate a newly closed deal, he hosted a lavish happy hour at an upscale downtown bar, reserving the entire back room for his team. The whiskey was top shelf, the laughter was loud, and the arrogance was on full display, with Brett Langley by his side, nodding at his every word. Tyler held court. The incident with the janitor had become a legendary tale, growing more embellished with each telling. "So there he is," Tyler began, his voice booming, sprawled out on the floor like a turtle on its back, water everywhere. "And he just looks up at me. This blank stare, you know." His audience of junior executives and ambitious salespeople chuckled on cue. "I told him, maybe try to keep up, buddy. You have to put people like that in their place. Show them who's in charge." Brett chimed in. "It's about setting a standard. You can't have people who don't belong here thinking they're on our level." The sentiment was met with murmurs of agreement. It was the core belief of their clique. The world was divided into winners and losers, and they were firmly in the winners' column. Everyone else was just scenery. As the night wore on and the expensive liquor flowed, Tyler's boasts grew bolder. He leaned in, lowering his voice to a conspiratorial hush, though it was still loud enough for everyone at the table to hear. "You know how we keep landing these monster contracts, how the billing questions just disappear?" He paused for dramatic effect, a smug smile playing on his lips. "It's all about who you know. My guy at the Pentagon. He keeps things smooth. Real smooth." He winked, a gesture of supreme self-satisfaction. "A little grease on the right wheel, and the whole machine runs in your favor. No one will ever be able to question our billing practices. Ever." He raised his glass in a toast. "To smooth sailing," he declared. They all cheered, clinking their glasses together, celebrating a corruption they were all now complicit in. What they didn't know was that their celebration was being recorded. The quiet, efficient waiter who had been refilling their drinks all night, the one they barely noticed, was not a waiter at all. He was a junior FBI agent, part of the expanded surveillance team Darius had requested. A tiny high-fidelity microphone was concealed in the center of the floral arrangement on their table. Every boast, every incriminating word, was being fed directly to a receiver. Miles away, in his small, Spartan safe house, Darius sat with a pair of headphones on, a grim smile on his face. He listened to Tyler's drunken bragging, the casual admission of bribery, the sheer, unadulterated arrogance. It was better than he could have hoped for. Tyler wasn't just confirming the existence of a Pentagon contact. He was admitting to the entire scheme in a room full of witnesses. It was a gift. Darius saved the audio file, labeling it Cray Confession H. This was the piece of evidence that would bring the whole house of cards down. He pictured Tyler in that bar, puffed up with pride, thinking he was the king of the world. He had no idea that his own big mouth was the weapon that would be used against him. Darius leaned back, a sense of cold satisfaction washing over him. The trap was set. The bait had been taken. Got him, he whispered into the quiet room. Now all that was left was to let the rest of the players reveal their hands. The time for listening from the shadows was almost over. Soon it would be time to turn on the lights. The culture of arrogance at Stratton Defense continued to flourish, unchecked and unchallenged. Brett Langley, having proven his loyalty and ruthlessness, was rewarded. He received a promotion to a senior project manager position, a role he secured by skillfully throwing a junior colleague under the bus for a minor project delay. It was a classic Stratton move, and it earned him praise from the upper echelons. The promotion went straight to his head. His already inflated ego swelled to grotesque proportions. He began to see himself as Tyler Cray's equal, a true player in the corporate game. His favorite target became Ellie Monroe. He seemed to have sensed her disapproval, her quiet judgment, and it infuriated him. He took every opportunity to belittle her in front of others. During a staff meeting while discussing budget forecasts, he singled her out. "Ellie, try to keep up with the numbers, will you? This isn't a charity." Later, when she presented a detailed report on accounting discrepancies, he dismissed it out of hand. "Careful, sweetheart," he said with a smirk, loud enough for half the department to hear. "You push too hard, you'll end up scrubbing floors with our janitor pal." The threat was laced with the memory of the hallway incident, a reminder of what happened to those who didn't know their place. Ellie fumed, her face burning with humiliation and rage, but she held her tongue. She remembered Darius's warning, "Act normal." She channeled her anger into her work, digging even deeper, finding more evidence of the phantom vendor scheme, and feeding it silently to Darius through secure, pre-arranged dead drops. Brett, however, wasn't content with just tormenting Ellie. He still harbored a strange fixation on the janitor, the man who had been the source of his and Tyler's shared amusement. He began to complain about Darius to anyone who would listen. "That janitor guy, he gives me the creeps," he'd say at the coffee station. "He's always lurking around so quiet. It's weird. And he's slow. The floors are never as clean as they should be." It was a power play, a way to demonstrate his new authority. He decided to take it a step further. He went to the Human Resources Department and filed a formal complaint. "The night janitor, David Johnson," he said to the HR manager, his voice filled with false concern. "I just don't think he's a good fit for our corporate culture. He's slow, and his demeanor is unsettling. I think we should review his contract." The HR manager, a woman whose primary job was to placate powerful executives, nodded sympathetically. "Of course, Mr. Langley. I'll schedule a performance review for him immediately." The meeting was set for the following week. It was a sham, a formality before firing a man for the crime of being mocked by a superior. News of the review quickly made its way to Darius. He had his own sources within the building's support staff, people who were really invisible to the likes of Brett and Tyler, the security guards, the cafeteria workers, the other cleaners. They saw everything, and they talked. They told Darius about Brett's complaint, about the scheduled meeting. Darius received the news with his usual unsettling calm. Brett's arrogance was becoming a liability, but it was also an opportunity. It was a sign that the rot was reaching a terminal stage. It was time to escalate. That night, from his secure safe house, Darius placed a quiet encrypted call. The person on the other end was not Director Grant. It was a contact deep within the Pentagon's own Office of the Inspector General, the military's Internal Affairs Division. Darius had been cultivating this source for months, preparing for this exact moment. "I have a name for you to watch," Darius said, his voice low and direct. "Tyler Cray, an executive at Stratton Defense. He has a contact inside procurement. We have him on tape bragging about it. He sent the audio file from the happy hour. We believe he's about to make another move. Get ready." The call was short, professional and deadly serious. Brett Langley thought he was getting a janitor fired. He had no idea he was triggering an avalanche. By trying to get rid of the man he saw as a slow and weird janitor, he had just accelerated the timeline for his own destruction. The pieces were all moving into place. The final act was about to begin. The end came swiftly. It began not in a grand boardroom or a tense interrogation room, but in the small, cramped janitor's closet that had been Darius's world for months. The scent of bleach and ammonia hung in the air, a familiar smell that he would never associate with cleaning again. It was the smell of the hunt. He sat on his overturned bucket, the glow of a laptop screen illuminating his face. The time for gathering intelligence was over. The time for action was now. He opened a secure, triple-encrypted communication channel. Director Evelyn Grant's face appeared, her expression calm but alert. She was in her own command center, surrounded by analysts and tactical coordinators. "It's time," Darius said, his voice stripped of all pretense. It was the voice of command. "The operation is complete. We have the financial trail. We have the confession, and their own arrogance is forcing their hand. Brett Langley just tried to have me fired." A faint, grim smile touched Grant's lips. "The poetically just love to write their own endings, don't they?" she said. "The Pentagon's internal affairs team is on standby. They've been tracking financial flows since you sent the audio. They believe they've identified the target, a deputy director in procurement. The money trail leads right to his offshore accounts." "Good," Darius said. "The board of directors at Stratton, they've been quietly notified," Grant confirmed. "The non-corrupt ones, at least. They are shocked, and they are ready to cooperate fully to save their company. They've called an emergency board meeting for tomorrow morning." Darius's plan was falling into place perfectly. He had one final request, one last piece of stage direction for the final act. "Make sure Tyler Cray and Brett Langley are in that boardroom tomorrow at 9 a.m. sharp," he instructed. "Tell them it's a meeting about a new, high-level security clearance they're being considered for. Appeal to their egos. They won't be able to resist." He could already picture it. The two of them striding into the room, puffed up with pride, expecting a promotion. They would be walking into their own execution. "They won't know what hit them," he added, a cold fire in his eyes. "Understood," Grant said. "The teams are ready to move on your signal. Warrants are signed and sealed. It's all on you, Agent Cole." "I'll be there to deliver the message myself," Darius replied. He closed the laptop, plunging the small room back into darkness. He stood up, the janitor's coveralls feeling like a foreign skin. He would wear them one last time on his way out of the building, but tomorrow he would be wearing a suit. He thought about Tyler and Brett, blissfully unaware of the storm that was about to break over their heads. They were probably asleep in their expensive homes, dreaming of power and promotion. They had tripped a janitor in a hallway because they thought he was nothing. Tomorrow they would learn that the man they tried to crush was the one holding their entire world in his hand. The next morning, the air in the executive wing of Stratton Defense was electric with anticipation. Tyler Cray and Brett Langley strode down the marble hallway, their shoes clicking with an extra measure of self-importance. They had been summoned to an emergency board meeting, an unprecedented event. The email from the CEO's office had been vague but thrilling, mentioning a matter of critical importance regarding a new government contract and enhanced security protocols. To them, it could only mean one thing: a massive new opportunity, a step up to an even higher level of power and prestige. "This is it," Brett whispered excitedly to Tyler, his voice buzzing. "This has to be about that new Aegis contract. They're bringing us into the inner circle." Tyler just smiled, a confident, knowing smirk. "Of course they are," he said smoothly. "Who else would they trust with it? We deliver. It's what we do." He straightened his already perfect tie, picturing his name on a bigger office door, a larger bonus check. They reached the main boardroom, a cavernous space with a long, polished mahogany table that could seat 30. They pushed the heavy oak doors open and walked in, their smiles ready. The smiles died on their faces instantly. The atmosphere in the room was not celebratory. It was thick with a cold, silent dread. Seated around the table were the most powerful figures in their world: the company's CEO, the CFO, and several members of the board of directors. Their faces were grim, their expressions like stone. Next to them sat two men in severe dark suits, who radiated an unmistakable aura of federal authority. They were from the Pentagon's Inspector General's office. Tyler and Brett froze in the doorway, their swagger vanishing like a puff of smoke. "What's this about?" Tyler stammered, his voice suddenly small. The CEO, a man who had praised him just last week, looked at him with icy disappointment and said nothing. All eyes were on them. The silence was absolute, heavy, and suffocating. Then, the door at the far end of the room opened, a figure stepped inside. He was tall and broad-shouldered, wearing a perfectly tailored black suit that spoke of power and authority. He moved with a quiet, confident grace. He walked past the silent board members and came to a stop at the head of the table. It was the janitor. But it wasn't. The posture was different. The face was the same, but the eyes were not. The vacant, humble gaze was gone, replaced by a look of sharp, unyielding intelligence. There was no apology in his demeanor, no trace of deference. In his hand he held not a mop, but a thick leather folder. He placed his hand inside his jacket and pulled out a small leather wallet, flipping it open to reveal a gleaming gold badge. "Special Agent Darius Cole," he said, his voice clear, strong, and utterly unfamiliar. A wave of shock washed over Tyler and Brett. Brett's jaw dropped, a strangled gasp escaping his lips. The color drained from Tyler's face. His mind struggled to process what he was seeing. The janitor, the man he had tripped, the man he had mocked and called a parasite, an FBI agent. "You," Tyler sputtered, pointing a trembling finger. The single word was a cocktail of disbelief, fear, and dawning horror. Darius's expression remained calm, almost serene. He looked directly at Tyler, his eyes cold as steel. He opened the thick folder he had placed on the table, the contents of which held their entire world of lies and deceit. "Let's talk about your billing practices," Darius said, his voice cutting through the stunned silence of the room. "Here are your crimes." The boardroom, once a stage for Tyler and Brett's ambition, had become their courtroom. Darius Cole stood at the head of the table, a figure of absolute authority. He was no longer the invisible man. He was the most powerful person in the room. He began to speak, his voice calm and methodical, laying out the case he had spent months building. "For the last 3 years," he started, his eyes scanning the pale faces of Tyler and Brett, "Stratton Defense has been systematically defrauding the United States government." He opened the folder. With a quiet thud, he placed a stack of invoices on the polished table. Exhibit A, payments totaling over $80 million to 6 phantom vendor companies. Companies, I might add, that have no employees, no offices, and no assets. They are nothing but mail drops and empty bank accounts, designed for the sole purpose of laundering stolen money. He pushed a small audio player to the center of the table and pressed play. Tyler's own voice filled the silent room, loud and clear, captured from the happy hour. "My guy at the Pentagon. He keeps things smooth. Real smooth. No one will ever be able to question our billing practices, ever." Brett went white as a sheet. He looked like he was going to be sick. Tyler stared at the audio player as if it were a venomous snake, his mouth opening and closing but no sound coming out. Darius didn't stop. He presented evidence of shredded documents, painstakingly pieced back together. He showed surveillance photos of discrete meetings, of USB drives being exchanged. He detailed the flow of money from Stratton, through the shell companies, and into offshore accounts linked directly to several senior executives, including Tyler. Then he paused and looked toward the door. "There is also the matter of witness testimony." The door opened again, and Ellie Monroe walked in. She looked nervous but resolute. She stood beside Darius, a quiet symbol of integrity in a room full of corruption. She placed her own file on the table. "I am a junior accountant at this company," she began, her voice gaining strength with every word. "I can personally attest to the falsification of these records. I watched as managers approved invoices for services I knew were never performed. I was told to look the other way." She looked directly at Brett. "I was told that if I didn't, I would end up scrubbing floors." Brett turned a sickly shade of green. His carefully constructed world was shattering before his eyes. Tyler, finally finding his voice, tried to fight back. "This is insane. It's a lie. She's a nobody. And him," he spat, pointing at Darius. "He's a janitor. This is a setup." His denial was cut short by one of the men from the Pentagon. The man spoke for the first time, his voice a low, gravelly rumble of authority. "Mr. Cray, while Agent Cole has been investigating you, we at the Inspector General's office have been investigating your contact." He slid a file across the table. Deputy Director of Procurement, Alan Carmichael, was taken into federal custody less than an hour ago. He has already confessed to accepting bribes from you for the last 2 years. We've already frozen all your personal and corporate assets, pending a full investigation. That was the final blow. The fight went out of Tyler completely. His shoulders slumped in defeat. The arrogance, the confidence, it all evaporated, leaving behind a terrified, hollowed-out shell of a man. Security personnel who had been waiting discreetly outside the door stepped into the room. They moved with quiet, professional efficiency toward Tyler and Brett. Brett began to panic, his eyes darting around the room looking for an escape that wasn't there. "You can't do this," he whimpered. Tyler, in a last, desperate burst of defiance, screamed, his voice cracking. "I'm the boss here. I run this department. I'm the boss." Darius looked at him, his expression unchanging, his voice cutting through the hysteria with surgical precision. "Not anymore." The fall was as swift as it was brutal. As security escorted a stammering Tyler and a sobbing Brett from the boardroom, the company was already in damage control mode. Outside the main entrance of the Stratton Defense Building, a swarm of media had gathered. News vans with satellite dishes on top lined the street. Reporters jostled for position, microphones extended, cameras flashing. They had been tipped off that a major federal operation was underway. The CEO of Stratton, his face a mask of somber regret, stood before the cameras and read a prepared statement. He announced the immediate termination of Tyler Cray, Brett Langley, and 3 other senior executives implicated in the scheme. He spoke of deep ethical failures and pledged the company's full cooperation with the ongoing federal investigation. His words were a desperate attempt to staunch the bleeding, to separate the company from the criminals it had nurtured. As the flashbulbs went off, Darius Cole stood a few feet away, just behind the official podium, next to Director Evelyn Grant, who had arrived to oversee the final stages of the operation. He wore his black suit and an impassive expression. He was no longer a shadow. He was the architect of their downfall, a silent figure of justice watching his work come to fruition. He didn't speak to the cameras. He didn't need to. His presence said everything. The consequences for Tyler and Brett were absolute. Their company credit cards were declined. Their bank accounts were frozen. The security passes to the building where they once ruled as kings were deactivated. When Brett tried to call his uncle, a powerful lobbyist, the man's secretary informed him that Mr. Langley was unavailable and would be for the foreseeable future. One by one, the connections they had relied on, the safety nets of wealth and influence they thought were unbreakable, fell away. They were toxic assets, and no one wanted to be associated with them. In the midst of the chaos, there was a quiet moment of justice for Ellie Monroe. After the boardroom meeting, the CEO had personally approached her. He offered her a sincere apology on behalf of the company, and, more importantly, a job. Not her old junior accountant role, but a new, senior position as the head of a newly created internal auditing department, with full authority to investigate any and all financial matters. "We need people like you," he had said, his voice heavy with the realization of how close his company had come to ruin. Ellie accepted. She would be part of the cure for the disease she had helped expose. The boss, Tyler Cray, the man who had bragged about owning a piece of the Pentagon, was now the beggar. He would soon be begging for a lenient plea bargain, begging for a lawyer he could no longer afford, begging for a second chance he would never get. The system he had so skillfully manipulated had turned on him, and it was about to chew him up and spit him out. A few days later, Darius Cole stood in the quiet stillness of a cemetery. The morning sun cast long shadows across the perfectly manicured lawn. He stood before a simple granite headstone that read, "James Cole, beloved husband and father." He placed a single fresh flower at the base of the stone. The world of Stratton, defense, of lies and arrogance, felt 1,000,000 miles away. Here, there was only peace. He thought of his father, the man whose humiliation had set him on this path. He thought of the quiet dignity with which his father had faced injustice. Darius had carried that memory not as a burden but as a compass, a guiding principle in a world that often lacked one. "You were right, Dad," he whispered to the silent stone. They never saw me coming. A gentle breeze rustled the leaves of a nearby oak tree. For the first time in months, Darius felt the tension in his shoulders begin to ease. The mission was over. Justice, in its own small way, had been served. He turned and walked away as the sun climbed higher in the sky, a new day dawning. Back at Stratton Defense, a new culture was struggling to be born from the ashes of the old one. Ellie Monroe, in her new role, began the arduous task of cleaning house for real. She implemented systems of transparency and accountability, ensuring that a scheme like Tyler's could never happen again. She was respected, listened to, and empowered. She had found her voice and her purpose. The story of the sting operation became a quiet legend, a cautionary tale whispered in corporate offices across the country. The security footage of Tyler and Brett tripping the man they thought was a simple janitor, followed by the footage of that same man in a suit leading them away in handcuffs, was eventually leaked. It became a powerful training tool used in business schools and ethics seminars. It was a stark, visual reminder of a profound truth. The moral of the story was clear, echoing from the marble halls of Stratton to the quiet dignity of a father's grave. Never underestimate the quiet ones. Never dismiss the people working in the background, for they are the ones who see everything. And sometimes they are the ones who hold the power to bring the whole corrupt structure crashing down. Treat every person with dignity, not because of what they might be, but because of who you are. For true strength is not measured by how high you can climb, but by how you treat those who you believe are beneath you. If this story about dignity and justice moved you, don't forget to subscribe for more inspiring stories like this one. What would you have done in this situation? Let us know below.